So hi everyone, welcome to the Ignite STEM keynote. We have with us Professor John Danner, who is an entrepreneurship professor at Princeton. Arian already gave a very nice sort of introduction for Professor Danner, but again, Professor Danner teaches courses on innovation, strategy, and venture development at Princeton, as well as the UC Berkeley Haas School of Business. He also anchors programs for the UC Center of Executive Education, as well as other international sponsors, and he also guest lectures on various college campuses. We're very excited to have him with us today to share some of his insights into the design challenge, as well as the design thinking process. And Professor Danner, the floor is all yours. We can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Thanks a lot, Gloria, and good morning, everybody. It's a little earlier out here in California, but we'll persevere. I'm delighted to get a chance to spend some time with you and share some ideas about this topic of design thinking. You know, I get a rare privilege of teaching a lot of talented students on both coasts at the University of California, Berkeley, and also back at Princeton. So it's an extra treat to get a chance to talk to a lot of talented high school students, which I ordinarily don't get a chance to do. So here's this topic of design thinking. And I've been trying to figure out how I can kind of both give you it and at the same time maybe give you some examples and some hints along the way for this day-long adventure that you're going to be on with this Ignite STEM program today. Let me try to summarize it this way. Design thinking is basically ideas made real. Ideas made real. Now, I'm assuming that most of you are watching this on a laptop or computer of some sort, maybe some of you on your phones. But for those of you who are on the laptop, just take a look at that keyboard in front of you. Just think about that for a second. Does that make any sense whatsoever? Look at the arrangement of letters. Q-U-E-R-T-Y. I don't know what language that is. It's not a language that I speak. The only thing that arguably makes sense on that whole keyboard are the numbers. At least they're in order, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 0, back to 0 again. That's design thinking. That keyboard is the result of multiple ideas made real through a process of prototyping and iteration and testing and experiments. Or let me give you another example. Think about the chair you're sitting in right now. The chair. I don't know how yours is designed. I don't know whether it has wheels on it or not. I don't know if it's comfortable or not, has arms on it or not. I have no idea. But that chair that you're sitting on is itself the result of design thinking. What height it should be, how wide it should be, what it should feel like when you're sitting on it, whether it works, whether you want to come back to it. Think about the phone that you use. What is it about it that you like? The feel of it, the size of it, the way the screen's organized? What about the music that you like on it? That music has been designed. Some composer designed that music. Some performer sang that music by design. Think about the invisible connections that allow that music to be heard in the first place. All of that technology, invisible to us, was designed. It's the result of design thinking. Somebody had an idea, somebody made it real. Now, the interesting thing about design thinking is that the designs that work, we tend to start to take for granted. And if you think about it just for a second, think about the things you take for granted. I don't know the last time you may have gone on a trip, but I'd be willing to bet you that probably most of the luggage that you carried had rollers on it. Man, how long did it take before somebody figured out the bright idea that maybe if we attach rollers to luggage, we might be able to move through airports or bus stations or train stations a little bit easier? How long did that take? It was a simple combination of ideas. Or think about Airbnb. People have been renting out spare rooms forever and ever. But it was Airbnb that figured out, wait a second, maybe we could combine the web with that practice and willingness of people to rent out a spare room, maybe not by the month or by the year or by the semester, but maybe by the night. And suddenly Airbnb begins to make sense. And the two of the three founders of Airbnb were in fact design thinkers by profession, by training. So design thinking is something that we live with all the time. And all of us are designers in one way or another. And you're going to get a chance today to experiment with yourself as designers. So although the title is design thinking, it really is more design doing that I think is something to keep in mind as you and your teams work through your efforts today. Now, it's interesting when you look at the materials that are on the web about design thinking, and chances are many of you have already had a chance to do that. And you've probably seen the 5 usual building blocks of design thinking, right? Empathize, define, iterate, prototype, and test. And those are great steps to follow. They're tried and true. We're going to talk about each of them, but in a slightly different configuration, because I want to give you a way that you can begin to put these things into action for your prompt today. And the prompt is this disaster question. How do you design buildings that can withstand the pressures and tests of disasters of one sort or another? But remember, buildings are containers for what people do and need. They hold people, they hold things, they hold services, they hold supplies, but they're inanimate objects. How do you empathize with an inanimate object? I ask that question because one of the opportunities you have today is to think differently. Think about how a problem might be framed in an unusual way. Redefine the boundaries of it. Think about it from a different perspective. Walk around the problem and see how it looks, what language might come to mind, what metaphors might come to mind as you think about these different ways of conceptualizing and perhaps defining the very problem that you are going to be trying to solve for the day with your colleagues. Now, a lot of design thinking has to do with asking the right questions. And questions are great because questions really have 2 fundamental purposes in these kinds of settings. One is they challenge assumptions. They challenge assumptions. By the way, they also challenge authority, which is not bad too from time to time. But let me go back to this assumptions issue. You know, assumptions are basically beliefs about what we don't know. Beliefs about what we don't know. We make up things to fill in the gaps of things that haven't yet been proven true, things that haven't yet risen to the level of facts that we can all agree upon. And assumptions are one of both the advantages and resources that you have to work with, but also one of the obstacles that you're likely to encounter today. Assumptions like, that won't work, or nobody's ever done that before, or we don't know enough to try that, or why would anybody think of an idea like that? It makes no sense. Those are all assumptions. And oftentimes, the assumptions that we start with lead us to one of the easiest crimes that we are all guilty of. And that's the crime of killing ideas. Ideacide. Think about it for a second. You know what it feels like to have an idea of yours killed. It can get killed by a joke, it can get killed with a snide comment, it can get killed with a criticism. It gets shut down. And that's too easy for all of us to do. We do it in class, we do it with our friends, we do it all the time. Design thinking is an opportunity to hold that off a little bit. Give ideas a little bit of an opportunity to get some oxygen, to be listened to a second time. And sometimes ideas need partners. One idea on its own may not make much sense, may not work, but put it together with one or two other ideas and suddenly you have a different kind of solution. Ideas don't often always have to be about things either. I had a chance a couple of weeks ago to give a talk to the people who run the California highway system, right? It's one of the biggest transportation systems in the world. And I used two examples of innovations that were the result of design thinking. One was a font on signs, a new font that someone designed that allows signs, roadway signs, freeway signs, to be read a little bit earlier, a little bit faster. And that translates into roads that are just a little bit safer because people have a little bit more time to think about making an exit or making a turn or passing. And the other example is an example of an idea looking for a partner. You may have noticed when you're on the road sometimes, those little reflectors in the middle of the road. Those reflectors are a combination of the collision of two different ideas. One was the reflector itself, right? What allows you to see that thing at long distance at night. But the other was an adhesive that allowed that reflector to be connected to something that could be put in the middle of a road and withstand snow and rain and ice and different temperatures. So without the other, neither idea would have worked. Put them both together and you get something, again, that makes the roads that we all depend upon safer. So I said to you that I wanted to give you some hints about how you might go at this design thinking challenge. And here's my suggestion. Let's go with the acronym DESIGN itself. Design. D. Define the issue that's in front of you in this particular prompt today. You've got a challenge. In that challenge are a lot of assumptions. Define what you think the real issue is here. An example might be disaster. What kind of disaster? Are we talking about immediate disasters like earthquakes? I live in Northern California. We live with that threat all the time. Or is it perhaps a different kind of disaster? Maybe one that's a little slower moving to begin with, but then can pick up, like a forest fire or a hurricane, or one that might even be slower still, like a flood. Or maybe you stretch the time horizon on defining the disaster that your team is interested in to include something that's really long-term, but universal, like global warming or ocean sea rise. Those are disasters in the making. That's just one example. That's the what kind of disaster does your team want to focus on? A second issue is who's involved in this? Whose disaster are you really trying to focus on? Rich people? Poor people? People in cities? People on farms? Who are you trying to help here? What kind of buildings are we talking about? Homes? Offices? Churches? Gymnasiums? Football arenas? What kinds of structures are involved here? And then perhaps the most important question of all, why? The enemy of an assumption is the question why. It's a question you almost can't answer too often. Why? 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 Why are you doing this? Is it to save lives? Is it to save money? Is it to buy time? In other words, maybe the trick here is to give people who live and work in those buildings more time to prepare or to escape or to figure out how to protect themselves while they're inside those buildings when a disaster is happening. Is it to make the quality of life better? Is it to improve something else about what those buildings are actually used for? whether it's to work or to live or to play or to worship or to learn. Ask those questions, and you can begin to define the scope of the issue or the problem that your design is attempting to solve. E, empathize. What does empathize mean, really? It means step into the problem and the people who encounter that problem or need. Think about, feel about what it is to experience that particular problem. I'm in a building. I'm living in a building, working in a building, playing in a building. Who are those people? What might help them in the design of the building itself? Because as I suggested earlier, it's pretty hard to empathize with a building. How does a building feel? I personally don't know the answer to that question. Maybe there is one. So define it. Empathize with the user. S, sketch, draw. Let me suggest that you might consider this the ink in the design thinking, because oftentimes it's not just talking about ideas, it's actually drawing them, putting them on a whiteboard, putting them on a piece of paper, sharing them with one another. Oh, that's what you mean. Oh, I see what you mean. Sketch it out. Very few of us are professional artists. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about writing your ideas down, drawing them out, comparing notes with one another. So think about sketch. I, iterate. Iterate's a fancy word for repeat. Iterate. What it means is that your first idea, your very first idea, is probably not going to be the best idea, but it's an important step to getting to that best idea. You're not going to know what's going to work initially. You're going to have to try it. And you're going to have to try it again and again and again and again. In some ways, in design thinking, as in many areas of life, failure is going to be your best teacher. Failure is going to teach you where that assumption was you made before that might have not been quite as accurate or correct as you wanted it to be. Failure is going to teach you what might need to be tweaked in your idea, in your design, to make it a little bit better, to make it a little bit more likely to work. So the more iterations you can make in your ideas and your team's ideas, the better. That is gaining information from the outside world. And remember, most of the wisdom is going to be outside your team, not inside your team. So try these ideas. Talk to other people about them. Try them on for size. See what works. See what doesn't. And then go back and try it again with a little bit of a change. G, get real. Think about how your solution, your design, can practically work to address the issue, the problem, the need that is teed up for you in this particular prompt. How exactly would this work? Could it work? So get real. And then N is sort of the spirit with which I'd suggest you go at your efforts today. N, nobody's as smart as everybody is. And I say that because this is a team effort. I teach entrepreneurship. There's no such word as solopreneurship. It's entrepreneurship. Entre is the mantra. You do it with other people. You benefit from the diversity of different ideas and different perspectives. And that's what you're going to experience today as well. Think about how you can capture all of the ideas from your team early on. In design thinking, that's called divergent thinking, when no idea is off limits. Even crazy ideas are ones that are worth thinking about, recording, talking about, thinking about, before you begin to focus on a narrower set of ideas, probably by clustering and connecting some of those early ideas, including even ones that might have seemed pretty crazy early on. So think about design. Define the issue, Empathize with the user. Sketch some possibilities. Iterate on your tentative designs, your prototypes. Get real. Try to get this solution that you're working on to be as practical as possible. And remember, nobody's as smart as everybody is. Don't kill ideas too soon. Listen to your teammates. And I'll give you one final piece of advice. Remember, you're in a competition today. Lots of other smart teams are working on exactly the same issue, the same prompt that you are for this design challenge. So give yourself a little bit of time during the day to think about how you're going to present your solution at the end of the day. You all know the word show and tell. Think about it this way, maybe for today. Show and sell. How can you convince somebody else that your idea is good, creative, practical, and that your team is committed to it? That's about persuading. That's about suggesting to an audience the world would be much better off if they only follow your team's design solution for this particular challenge. So I wish you well. You're in for a lot of fun, a lot of excitement, a lot of argument, I suspect, and disagreement, but that's all part of the process, because what you're going to be doing today is making your own ideas a little bit more real than they are right now. Good luck. Now, I think I'm available for some Q&A, and if I understand this platform correctly, with some help from Gloria and Sahil and others, I'm going to sign off of this screen and hopefully appear on the other screen so we can do Q&A. Does that work?
Yeah, so we actually have separate sessions right now, and so if Aryan wants to join, but essentially everyone will have three options. Either you can hop onto the session that's coming up next, where you can ask some questions and just get to know Professor Danner and his work a little bit more, or you can choose to stay here on the stage for a Kahoot. Or you can also choose to head over to the networking section on the left and meet some of your fellow participants. So I think Ananya will be stopping the broadcast shortly, but again, just check back into the reception area to choose which of the three options you want to do for the next 20 minutes.